Hi, friends. My name is Darren Gerdes, and I just want to thank you for spending 10, 12, 15 minutes with me as we talk over the news of the day in Ukraine. I do these daily, so if you're not familiar with me, please consider subscribing. I go over the headlines and I look for a coherent theme, and today the theme is clearly Zelensky. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of Zelensky. I wrote a book about Zelensky. You can look it up on Amazon. Just find my name, Gerdes, and Zelensky, and you'll find it. Um, and today it's just really pretty amazing what he's been doing. Zelensky, and now I thought about this long and hard, and I don't think that a Ukraine with a Putin-like figure at the head would have survived. Only with someone like Zelensky have they been able to survive. And it doesn't mean that he's the only guy. He's worked very hard to not do jobs that he shouldn't be doing or he's not equipped to do. But he's equipped to communicate, and he does it extremely well. And he focuses like a laser on those things that he should do. He's not running around posing, trying to look like shirtless Putin. He's not doing any of that. He does get to the front line, and he does get the photo op because it's encouraging to everyone else while he's there encouraging people on the front lines, but he's not doing this kind of nonsense. Okay, so what has he been doing lately? So more military aid is pledged as Russia pounds infrastructure. So here, the G7 promised to meet Ukraine's urgent requirements after Zelensky spoke with the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States. So Zelensky urged the G7 to help Kyiv obtain an extra 2 billion cubic meters of natural gas for energy shortages. So he knows what the problem is, and he's focused on that. Okay, so whether it's energy, which we're talking about here, or something else, and I'll talk about this something else in a little bit. When the energy stability of Ukraine is guaranteed during this winter period, it will be guarantees that there will be no new waves of mass migration from our country to your country. Do you see what he did there? He just tied his problem to their problem. We're trying to not have waves of refugees flooding into your countries. Please help us with this. Russia will have to think about how to stop the aggression. Energy is one of the keys to this. I believe that the key is in your hand. Masterful communication. It's just really amazing. Here, a little bit more critical energy infrastructure. The President Zelensky calls on the European Union by analogy with the permanent IAEA. And what he's asking for them to do is to take international control of energy, like the nuclear power plants and other energy facilities, because they've had 8 waves of Russian missile strikes. About 40% of high voltage network facilities have been damaged. And so he's reaching out strategically, talking to everyone where they are. Not everyone the same. You don't lead by treating everyone exactly the same. You treat by dealing with them where they are and what they're doing and that kind of thing. So he's really masterful at that. He's also talking about this in order to create a special mechanism for coordinating efforts, the Paris mechanism, which will make it possible to give timely and effective responses to every challenge of Russian energy terror. So far, unfortunately, we do not have such a modern air defense system that could shoot down 100% of Russian missiles and drones, but we have created a decision-making system that can 100% deprive Russia of terrorist tactics. So he's focused on energy. He's focused on shooting down missiles that are coming at those power generation things. He's focused where he needs to be focused, and he's not spending his time doing things that he shouldn't be doing. Okay, a little bit more. Generators are as important as armor. What a great line. Generators are as important as armor in helping Ukraine survive, Volodymyr Zelensky has told the emergency conference in Paris. The aim of the conference is to set up an international coordination mechanism to ensure that Ukraine secures the right mix of generators, transformers, equipment for the restoration of high voltage networks and turbines. That's exactly what he should be doing. The French-inspired conference is designed to coordinate humanitarian aid to Ukraine that is being attended by more than 40 countries and 30 multilateral bodies. Now, to that, Dmitry Peskov said the Ukrainian side needs to take into account the realities that have developed during this time, and these realities indicate that new subjects have appeared in the Russian Federation. Look at what Peskov is saying, what he's calling the people that are in these 4 oblasts subjects. They're not partners. They're not citizens. They're not, right? That's how they think of them, and they treat them this way, as if these are people under our thumbs. So, and we'll come back to that because we're going to talk about Peskov in a little bit as well. On Fox News, David Petraeus was being interviewed, and he said something really interesting about this. He said, bolstering the U.S. military's core strength and will to take on China and increasing aid for Ukraine. Those two things should be the number one and number two top priorities in the annual defense policy bill. A little bit down further, by the way, Petraeus is huge. He was the general in charge in the counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan, which turned that around. He was the head of the CIA. When he talks, I listen. And he says this, and that's why support for Ukraine is so important, especially in coming after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, to show that the U.S. can and will lead the world, as it has the will to do just that. So again, that has to far and away be the top priority. What has to be? Ukraine, showing the world that the U.S. has the will to support Ukraine. And I think that's a very, very important thing. Petraeus is saying what Zelenskyy is actually doing. Okay, Russia propaganda, this is a little bit different of a story, but it's still worth showing you for a reason, and you'll see in a little bit. Russian propaganda media, an ex-president guilty of direct incitement to genocide in Ukraine, says a report. Now, if you don't know who this is Margarita Simonin. She is the editor of RT, and I show RT in Pravda all the time because they're just, it's so inflammatory, and like, these are things that the Russians are exposed to and that the rest of the world is exposed to secondhand as they get printed and reprinted. An important study carried out set out to determine whether Russian state media are guilty of direct and public incitement to genocide in their coverage of events linked with Russia's war against Ukraine. The direct link between Russian propaganda and war crimes should be obvious and become the subject of legal analysis. A little bit further down, the role of the Russian state media to incitement to genocide was described in some detail by the group of 30 recognized human rights lawyers and scholars. For his study, Chikashev chose both state media and one prominent official, namely Dmitry Medvedev, who, as reported earlier, has fairly openly incited to genocide on his Telegram channel. The state media resources are Russia Today, or RT, which I regularly show, RIA Novosti, the talk show Time Will Tell, 60 Minutes, and goes on and on. Okay, the dehumanization, accusations of crimes, encouragement of violations prompt the audience to adapt a particular position on the conflict, the report continues. The report cites a brief document listing the 5 Ds of incitement, namely dehumanization, demonization, delegitimization, disinformation, and denial, and those things are all there. Now, this reminds me of a book. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Something like something about it's hard for a soldier to kill another person. Like it really is hard for them mentally to pull the trigger. And what they have to do before they are willing to pull the trigger is dehumanize the opponent. So you remember, like in World War II, the Japanese were not the Japanese soldiers. They were Japs or Nips. The Germans were Krauts. If you look in Vietnam, the Vietnamese were called gooks. They were called something less than human. And I think everybody needs to be able to do that in order to do this. And I hear a lot of Ukrainians talk about the Russian soldiers as orcs. I don't know what the Russians call Ukrainians. If anybody knows that, I'd be interested in hearing that. But you kind of need to do that. So that's that dehumanization. And then demonization. Remember, they're all a bunch of Nazis. Delegitimization. They're not really their own country. Disinformation. There's a propaganda effect. And denial. This is negating what they actually said. But there's this fascinating passage down here. And RT does this all the time. Russian state media does this again and again. And I point it out again and again. Accusation in a mirror. Accusation in a mirror is a powerful, historically recurring form of incitement to genocide. A perpetrator accuses the targeted group of planning or having committed atrocities like those the speaker envisions against them. Framing the victims as existential threat makes violence against them appear defensive and necessary. You know that Putin does this all the time. You hear him do this all the time. In fact, we're going to turn our attention right now to fun with Russian state media, and you'll see this. So here's the first article. Russia admits that Zelenskyy has no relations to resolving conflict in Ukraine. Like, he wants to resolve the conflict. He just doesn't want to do it your way. Ukraine's peace formula. Zelensky announced the peace formula during his online speech at the G20 summit in November. Now, this is not this week's thing. This was what happened back in November, where he gave out this like 12-point plan. And there were things like, look, we need guarantees and protection, and we need to not have this happen again. And we need to make sure that our borders are protected and things along those lines. Zelensky's peace formula is unacceptable for Russia. Well, of course it is, because you just tried to steal 4 of their territories beyond Crimea, which you already stole, and now you want to say the game is locked. The demands of the Ukrainian peace formula were unacceptable to Russia. Zelensky's conditions indicate that, unlike the United States and the European Union, he has no real relation to resolving the conflict. Okay, so this is the kind of nonsense they put on here. Here's another article. Chechnyan President Kadyrov laughs at Zelensky's peace formula demands. Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya with the bad beard, believes that in order to resolve the situation, all fascist criminals and I don't even know what that is, shaitans, responsible for atrocities against the Russian-speaking population should be either extricated or brought to justice. Huh? Okay, so, I mean, he's just believing some bizarre storyline. The conditions for negotiations with the leadership of Ukraine are ridiculous, he says. And the hits keep coming. Let's go on to the next article. Here is the Kremlin. Withdrawing Russian troops from Ukraine before 2023 is out of the question. Dmitry Peskov says the Russian troops from Ukraine before the end, drawing them from Ukraine before the end of this year is out of the question. And he says these realities indicate that the Russian Federation has obtained new subjects. Remember, they're subjects, they're not citizens. They have appeared as a result of a referenda that took place in these territories. It was rigged, but I mean, it's still a referenda. The day before, Ukrainian President Zelensky suggested that Russia should withdraw its troops before New Year's holidays. And I can't imagine that this just wasn't unnerving, this little line here. This is Zelensky saying, I offer Russia at least to try to prove that it's capable of refusing aggression. It would be right to begin with the withdrawal of Russian troops from their internationally recognized territory of Ukraine this Christmas. Well, of course, they're not going to do that, but I'm sure it got their underwear in a bunch. Okay, 2 more articles. Retired U.S. Colonel suggested Zelensky should flee to Poland. Okay, so retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, and I've read other articles by him. And now, just like the professor that I talked about the other day, you can safely ignore the guy. Now, when I posted that video, when I said safely ignore the guy, I went back and I looked at some of his articles, and he's just all in on Russian propaganda. And that's why I said that. So somebody brought me to task on that in the comments and said, hey, you know, if you didn't read the book, you shouldn't be saying that. That's correct. But I did read enough of his articles to see where he's coming from. And so is this Douglas McGregor. So is the Marine that we were talking about the other day. These guys show up. If you show up getting printed in Pravda and RT regularly, you're probably not the kind of guy that is going to be helpful here. He says Zelensky should not hope to win the conflict with Russia. He says soon Kyiv may find itself in a situation when there is no one to fight, McGregor admitted. He admitted. What? So what he's saying is that there will be no Ukrainians left. And the only thing that Zelensky may count on is an escape to Poland. So he should be running to Poland now, is what he's saying. Okay, last article in RT. Kremlin dismisses Zelensky's demands. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said there are 3 steps toward continual military action, he said on Tuesday. The things that Zelensky outlined. And those steps included things like give us more weapons and give us some more gas and it'll help us achieve our goals, those kind of things. Back when we were talking about the G20, those like 12 steps or however many there were, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said at the time that Zelensky's speech in the G20 was full of militant, Russophobic, and aggressive rhetoric. Yes, like we need to defend our borders and we need to not have, we need to bring people who perpetrate war crimes to justice. That's aggressive because it's aggressive toward Russia, who is being aggressive back. So it's kind of like saying if you're bullying somebody and then they hit you, that was aggressive. That's what's going on. It's this weird mirror kind of reality when they're talking about it. But that's the way that RT rolls, and that's what's going on. Okay, at any rate, Zelensky is one of the greatest leaders that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it's really amazing what he's been able to do. I have nothing but profound respect for him. Hey, thank you for listening to this. Thank you for caring enough about Ukraine to spend this time with me.